Welcome to the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council with hosts Grace Evans and Moses Brattrud. Stay informed on the top stories on life, family, and religious freedom. Get the facts, stand for truth.
Hello, this is Moses Brattrud from the Family Beacon podcast. I'm here with a special supplement this week, and my guest today is Seth Gruber. Seth is a pro-life activist, and he's coming to the Twin Cities in just a few weeks on November 17th. So I'm excited to interview Seth, meet him, and hear what he's all about. Seth, thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for your work.
So you are a pro-life activist, and I'm curious. I work with a pro-life activist. I guess by some definitions I am one, but I guess that isn't the thing I think about the most. How did you get involved in pro-life work? What gets you up in the morning to keep doing that?
Yeah, well, I was raised in the pro-life movement. I actually say I've been a pro-life activist since I was a fetus, and so my mother was the executive director of a pregnancy resource center in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and actually only stepped down from directing that center when she gave birth to me. And so I've been reliably informed by the follow the science, Francis Collins, NIH, CDC, FDA, tyrant would-be revolutionaries, that there is just one body. It's her body, her choice. There is no other body. And so therefore, according to the law of transitive properties, every part of my body was just part of my mother's body. I actually did not possess my own body or my own dignity or rights. And so in a sort of strange way, following the science of leftism and transgenderism, I guess I was a pro-life activist since I was a fetus, because every baby my mother saved was actually just me saving that child, because there was only one body, my mother's. Now, of course, we all know how ridiculous the term follow the science is in today's political discourse. It just means what the left really wants and masquerades as the science so that they can castigate their political opponents as science deniers.
Right.
And so that's sort of my heritage and beginning. And then I started a pro-life club in college, and then started doing full-time pro-life speaking when I graduated in 2014, and recently became the founder and CEO of my new organization, the White Rose Resistance. And so that's the little bit about my background.
That's awesome. Yeah, so that's some interesting logic there. I guess by the same token, like that country song, like you are your own mother, and also you were once a woman and now you've transitioned. So how's that going?
Yeah, well, it's actually the same kooky, ancient, Gnostic dualistic heresy that undergirds abortion as animates the transgender craze and movement today. It's all based off of this false anthropology of the person, really kooky, weird views that the church kind of declared a heresy centuries ago. This idea that the body's not really the person. The body's bad, it's evil, it's fallen, it's prone to sin. This is what the early Gnostic Christians believed. And so, you need to liberate yourself from the constraints and limitations of this evil body. And you know what? You actually aren't your body. This is just kind of a shell. None of this is the real person. The real person is our thoughts, our aims, our consciousness, our desires, untangible things. That's the person. So the body's just a shell, which is why a man can be in a woman's body, a woman can be in a man's body, because what animates a man and a woman is their self-realization and their view of themselves, rather than the physical reality of their male or female body. And it's the same sort of kooky theories that undergird the pro-abortion movement and position today, because they say, well, the baby may have a body, it may be human, because they all admit it's a human being today. We all know this. It may have a human body, but you see, that's not enough. Being human's not enough, because you see, the body's just a shell. And until that baby has individual thoughts, consciousness, self-awareness, and desires, then the person, quote unquote, is actually not there yet. It's just the shell of the body. It's the same freaking weird, ancient, Gnostic, dualistic heresy and false anthropology of the person that animates both abortion and transgenderism. So we have to turn those things on their head and poke back.
Wow.
And poke back hard because of the times we're living in.
That's actually really interesting to link those two things, because actually the last time I was doing this type of Zoom interview, usually I do things more in person, I was interviewing Carl Trueman, who's written a book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, which actually is doing very similar to what you're just describing, linking those two things, abortion and transgenderism, as uniquely the problems of our modern age, and yet, as you say, not with ancient roots. So your organization is called the White Rose, and I'm a little bit, I think I'm familiar with that reference, going back to the Nazi, anti-Nazi student activist Sophie Scholl, her brother Hans.
Yep.
Is that the origin?
Yep.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Hans and Sophie Scholl, Christoph Probst, Alexander Schmorell, and many others, all of whom were murdered by the end of 1943. And so it's one of the least known but most inspirational stories from Nazi Germany. And it's a famous axiom, but it's no less true because of it. Those who forget their history are doomed to repeat it. And we have seemingly been proving that axiom true. One could argue, since maybe the early revolutionaries like Margaret Sanger and others in the New York labor movement of the early 1900s, but certainly in the last 3 years, and the quote unquote good people who disagree with the secular, more revolutionary political agenda but have never really contended for the rights that they've taken for granted in America. They're not really involved in the project of self-government, right? They take these freedoms and liberties for granted in America. Those people are starting to wake up and go, what have we wrought? And I know this because I've probably spoken in more pulpits on the issue of abortion and life since September 2020 than probably any pro-life speaker in the world. And there is an awakening happening in the church. People are starting to wake up. And now it's not to the degree, it's not to the percentage or degree we need yet to bring a grinding halt to this Nazi-esque, secular, regressive, Marxist sort of takeover of the country. But maybe we're starting to get there. Sure. Ronald Reagan once said that evil is powerless when the good are unafraid. And then Edmund Burke, of course, would famously say, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And Hans and Sophie, the White Rose Resistance, they lived those truisms till their final hours. And they understood that, listen, evil people do evil things. Stop complaining about it. Stop whining and moaning about it. Get used to it. Come on, be a student of history. What the hell are you talking about? This is the norm. Would-be tyrants who want to rule the world while driving a bus over the bodies of families, children, and babies so that they can accrue more political power, that's not the exception. That's the norm. The only thing that stands in their way is good people who are willing to actually sacrifice, get off the bench, get their boots on the ground, and do something to love their neighbor and for their posterity. And Sophie in particular rises to the surface as this incredibly inspirational figure at 21 years old throughout 1942, and then through February 22nd, 1943, when they were taken to the guillotine, because she would say things like this: how can we expect righteousness to prevail when there's hardly anyone willing to give themselves up individually to a righteous cause? Such a fine sunny day, and I have to go now. And she said that hours before being taken to the guillotine. But what does my death matter if through us, thousands of people are awakened and stirred to action? And she would later say that the real damage is caused by all of those millions out there who just want to survive. The honest men who just want to be left in peace, and those who don't want their little lives disturbed by anything bigger than themselves. In other words, she diagnosed the problem then as our problem now. And Sophie and the White Rose Resistance are speaking prophetically to us today to wake up and understand that we each have an individual mandate and duty. One as an American, but secondly as Christians, to love our neighbors, to demand the welfare of the city that we are in exile. As Jeremiah 29 says, for in her welfare, you will find your welfare. We're not selfishly demanding our rights. We're exercising our responsibility. And I'll wrap up my answer with this. Most of the societal and cultural rot we're experiencing in America right now, and particularly the last 3 years, whether it was the scamdemic shutdowns, forcing elderly people to die alone, quarantining the abused with their abusers, ruining people's livelihoods and businesses, pushing critical race theory and Alfred Kinsey demonically inspired pornographic sex ed onto minors. Name the problem. Most of that is actually a result of our tolerance and normalization of child sacrifice and the mutilation of children in the womb for the last 50 years. Abortion is kind of this litmus test of the republic because it forces us to ask those questions and re-examine those premises that our founders called self-evident. Right? That's why they put the right to life first. This isn't complex. This ain't rocket science, guys. The right to liberty and pursuit of happiness and property don't mean much. In fact, they mean nothing at all if you can be murdered. This is axiomatic, self-evident stuff. And now we're being forced to say, do we believe those things? As Lincoln would point out in the argument against slavery, in entertaining the logic that made slavery possible in the first place, Southern slave owners were actually putting in place the premises that justified their own enslavement. Because if the black man's not a person, because what did the white races argue? It was the darker skin and lower intellect. Well, then you'll find a skin color and intellect coming in varying degrees amongst white people too. It's the same argument with abortion. Why is the baby not a person? Why can't we kill them? Well, they're smaller, they're less developed. You know, they're dependent. Sure. Right? So all of those things also come in varying degrees amongst born people. These arguments put in place the premises that justify our own enslavement, and people are starting to wake up to that in this late hour of the American culture war. So yes, many issues are important, but they don't all carry the same moral weight. And abortion is the moral issue of our day because there's only one class of human beings alive today that it is legal to murder and whose deaths we're forced to fund with our tax dollars. And that's the unborn child, the location in which we all began and in which our Savior, if you're a Christian, entered human history in to redeem mankind from their sins. This is the litmus test of the church, the republic, and it's the sacrament of Satan. It's the sacrament of secular progressivism. It's what really does animate the entire political project that we now today call progressivism. But it's not progressive, it's regressive, because child sacrifice to pagan deities, sacrifice with the belief that your life would be improved or you could live a little bit longer, goes right back to the generations immediately following Adam and Eve. And we need to begin treating secular progressivism as a regressive movement and as an ancient religious heresy at that.
I really like how you're tying abortion into its historical context, because, as you say, it's not like Roe v. Wade happened in 1973 and people suddenly decided it was a great thing to have an abortion. Nobody had ever thought of it before then, and we're just dealing with 50 years of history. As you say, we're dealing with millennia of, in a sense, child abuse and even heretical or even demonic. You're saying demonic things that are going on. So I want to ask you about the Dobbs decision, because in a sense, so much has changed, and through that one decision, overturning 50 years of Supreme Court precedent, and we've seen so many things since then. We've seen pregnancy resource centers attacked. We've seen politicians going on the campaign trail, pledging abortion access up until the moment of birth, as if Roe v. Wade were still in force. So what would you say pro-life people need to realize about the Dobbs decision and its aftermath? Do we need to change our tactics?
Well, yes. I mean, it's a wonderful Kairos moment to be living in, right? We were told this would never happen. Roe v. Wade would never get overturned. It's settled law. Get used to it. Shut up, you pro-lifers. And so not only did we achieve this massive culture victory, but it was the one we were told was the least likely possible. And then the left started losing their freaking minds, which kind of reaffirms what I'm always saying to conservatives. It's kind of like, wake up, guys. They just proved my point. Like, this is their centerpiece. They don't know what to do now. All of the headlines and chyrons from the activist media, if you notice this, following the overturning of Roe, were things like, the GOP is just getting started. They're coming for us all. Without abortion, you know, they're going to come for all of our rights, right? They're coming for same-sex marriage next. Or they were like saying that conservatives want to like come after interracial marriage next. That was a big talking point after Roe got overturned. And you're like, dude, Clarence Thomas is married to a white woman. Shut up, dude. Like, he's not coming for his own marriage. But what was the takeaway? The takeaway was the left essentially told us, we don't know what to do now. We don't know what to do now. And our entire political project is on the precipice of crumbling. A very important lesson for conservatives, because the Watchmen, the Ezekiels of our time, have been saying this for a long time, that this is the animating principle and issue of the entire secular moral revolution. And so that's an incredible victory. But we need to say this and say this clearly. This is not the end of the pro-life movement. This is actually, in a very real way, it's the beginning of the pro-life movement. We were prevented for 50 years, essentially, from exercising federalism, from exercising the voice of the people in the local levels. You can't pass those laws, moot, blocked, sorry. And so it's a significant moment, and it's a reminder of the importance of self-government. It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in this American experiment, this republic, that you can't just expect others to do it for you. You can't expect your elected representatives to always do the right thing. You need to be involved in demanding the welfare of the city, getting the right men and women elected who will actually uphold those fundamental premises that built this republic in the first place. And of course, if you don't get the right to life right, you won't get any other rights right. And Absolutely. I think people are starting to recognize that. Those who murder the unborn cannot be trusted to govern the born. And boy, has that phrase proved itself true in the last 2 years. Remember, nearly everyone in the liberal establishment that defended lockdowns, that forced quadruple jab mandates onto children and adults, that fired them for refusing to get the jab when they already had natural immunity. All of these people are pro-abortion. Guys, that's not a coinkydink. That's not a coincidence. That is the consistency and train of ideas. And people tend to work out the logic of their position through their choices, even if they're not fully aware of the worldview assumptions that they're operating off of. So whether they're aware of it or not, whether they're useful idiots, to quote Lenin, or whether they're true revolutionaries who understand the project that they're implementing, these people hate the founding fathers. They hate the premises that built this republic, and they hate the idea of the sanctity of life, because that means there's a creator who endowed us with those rights. These people are demons. These people are disgusting individuals who would not hesitate to throw us in gulags. Conservatives and pro-lifers will say, Seth, you're speaking so hyperbolically. Stop talking about our political opponents that way. I'm not saying that to rile you up into a frenzy, guys. Many of these people would not hesitate to throw us into gulags. You mentioned there's over 100 pro-life ministries that were attacked after the overturning of Roe versus Wade. They were writing in red paint on the walls of pregnancy centers the words, "If abortions aren't safe, then you aren't either." And Jane's Revenge, and Ruth sent us, but Jane's Revenge, one of these pro-abortion domestic terrorist organizations, took responsibility for the attacks. They literally said, yeah, that was us. And also, you ain't seen nothing yet. They were promising to escalate physical violence against their political opponents. But if you're Mark Hope or any other number of pro-life activists that were arrested by the FBI in the last 34, 35 days, that's just speaking truth to power. You can trust the FBI. They're not targeting pro-lifers. Why is our political system rotting from within? Because of our tolerance of some of the most evil things possible and our refusal to what? Exercise self-government for us to be involved. And so it's a reminder for those in blue states that this is your hour now. This is your moment. It may be discouraging to live behind enemy lines, to have such a plurality of pro-abortion Democrats in your state, but that's no excuse. The left has been successfully pulling off their long walk through the institution, or their strategy of the robes, to quote Antonio Gramsci, for decades, and they have not done it with a majority or plurality. They've done it with a devoted and committed minority, but they were true revolutionaries. They took their ideas and they were willing to die for them. And that's why we're in this position, is the other side has been more dogmatic and religious about their premises and ideas than most Christians or theists have been about theirs. And there's a key lesson, if there's anything we learned from the left in the pro-abortion movement, it's that they're more committed than most Christians to their ideology. And so for you guys in blue states, don't be discouraged, man. Come on, let's go. Start asking yourself not who, not when, but now, not who, but you. What are you going to do in your local communities? And I always tell people and encourage them to start with sidewalk counseling. If you really want to see the spiritual battlefield that this is, if you want to see the spirit of Moloch manifesting in your cities, go stand outside of the killing centers that murder children and peacefully ask mothers to choose life and promise to help and support them. That'll start changing your heart in real ways. And then, of course, support pregnancy centers and pro-life ministries, volunteer, get engaged, do something. And then in red states, we have no more excuses now. No excuses for some of these squished GOP hacks. Now, there are many wonderful rock group conservatives in the GOP, but not nearly enough. And we need to hold these people accountable for the ideas that they espouse and say, you need to prove it now, or we're going to primary you. And so if there's any lesson, I think it's the lesson for Christians, conservatives, and pro-lifers to recognize, one, how important abortion always was to the left. This was their sacrament. And secondly, that we're only in this position because good men have done nothing. And we need to begin moving in action. Or to quote Bonhoeffer, only in action is freedom.
That's really stirring, honestly. I love to hear the future of the cause of life in blue and purple states like Minnesota as not being something that is hopeless, but rather something where it reminds me of something I think a World War II colonel or general said. People were radioing him, the Nazis have you encircled, and he's like, I've got them right where I want them, surrounded from the inside. So like a small, and then his forces broke out and stormed to freedom. And I think a relatively small numerical movement, as you've been discussing, can have a huge outsized impact on the cause, and can even snatch victory out of the jaws of defeat. So last question for you. You're going to be in town for a group that brings together 30 or 40 different pregnancy resource centers across this area. What do you think is the role of pregnancy resource centers, especially in the post-Dobbs era?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've learned how much of a target pregnancy centers are to the liberal establishment. And, I use these terms synonymously because they're all on the same team. You'd call the abortion industrial complex, you could call it the blob, the liberal establishment. And even if these people disagree on peripheral issues, they'll abandon those issues anytime the sacrament and fictional right to kill babies is compromised. Anytime abortion is compromised, the left will happily set aside their other political priorities to unite together to protect abortion. And so we saw that happening in the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And so the targeting, demeaning, and smearing of pregnancy resource centers is also an important lesson for pro-lifers and conservatives. The abortion industry and its cronies and allies despise pregnancy centers. Now, we've known the type of revile that they've had for pregnancy centers for decades, if you've been involved in the pro-life movement in any significant way. But again, the enemy starts overplaying his hand, and what happens? The good people start to wake up. They start to see what people like you and me have always seen and go, oh, wow, this is a wicked spirit. Like, this is evil stuff. And so we need those people who see evil in front of them to do something about it. And so, yes, I mean, you had nearly 100 or over 100 pro-life ministries, the vast majority of which were pregnancy resource centers that were physically defaced, vandalized, or in some cases, firebombed and burnt to a crisp. Some ministries had their entire offices burnt down. And then, of course, they were saying if abortions aren't safe, then you aren't either. And so Elizabeth Warren co-sponsors a piece of legislation shortly after Roe gets overturned, targeting pregnancy centers to smear them as the peddlers of misinformation, so that their search results won't show up as high on Google search ratings. And then you had a couple pro-abortion Democrats 3 or 4 weeks ago write a letter to Google demanding that Google censor the search results of pregnancy resource centers. And Google right now is complying with that. A year and a half ago, Google banned all paid ads for the abortion pill reversal. It's just progesterone. Progesterone just offsets the effects of RU486, which blocks progesterone, which breaks down the lining of the uterus and starves the baby to death. So it's just extra progesterone. It's incredibly safe. It's not dangerous for mom at all, actually. And it has, some people say, a 60 to 75% save rate for the baby if it's taken within the first 24 hours of the first regimen of the abortion pill. Google banned all those ads. Why? Because they said, actually, the abortion pill reversal is super dangerous for women. I mean, it's like these people are smearing pregnancy centers as the peddlers of misinformation. Are you kidding me? You mean when I go to Planned Parenthood's website and I try to find out what a suction aspiration abortion is, and it says it gently suctions out the pregnancy tissue. So they won't actually tell us what is involved in the very procedure that they say they provide adequate information to women to, because they respect informed consent. They respect choice. There's no such thing as pregnancy tissue. That doesn't exist. Pregnancy is not a thing. It's a condition. Conditions don't have tissue. Beings have tissue. So if you're a human being and you're a woman and you're pregnant, then what kind of tissue do you have? Well, if you're a human being and you're pregnant with another human being, then that's human tissue. So that's a human being. These are the people who have the gall to critique pregnancy centers for being the peddlers of misinformation. I mean, we're really through the looking glass now. Sometimes I wonder if the Cheshire cat is about to jump on my shoulder. But that was kind of always the point of secular progressivism, right? Was to create a la-la land, a wonderland, where it was hard to distinguish the true from the false, the good from the bad, and to attack the very ideas that built this republic. And so their smearing and attacking a pregnancy center should tell you everything you need to know. Pregnancy centers are very important in the fight for life, because they're, in a very real way, one of the final lines of defense, as well as with sidewalk counselors, who you could say are the final line of defense, actually, as well, who stand outside of the doors of death and counsel women. But pregnancy centers prove that we are here for the family and for children and for mothers. And obviously, our interest is in the child, because a woman who kills her unborn child is not a victim, but she is being victimized by the abortion industry, who does lie to her and does not give her the information she needs to make a truly informed consent. Pregnancy centers implode that narrative, the narrative that causes so many pro-choice moderates to vote for pro-abortion politicians anyways, because they've bought this activist media ad nauseum line that pro-life pregnancy centers are pro-birth. It's like, yes, we are pro-birth because we think everyone has a right to be born. So I guess we're pro-birth, but of course, you know how they use that. They're saying, once that baby's born, those pro-lifers don't give a rat's butt, right, about that baby, right? It's like they're saying, like, they just want to pack foster care systems because they don't care about that baby at all. And so they're just pro-birth. And that's why, haven't you heard? They lock women into their counseling rooms and they make them watch abortion videos, which, like, I literally have been keynoting pregnancy center banquets since I was 2014. Since I was 23, and I grew up in the pro-life movement, and literally have never heard of that happening ever. Now they give them the option to see what's involved in an abortion and what's involved in their pregnancy and the development of their child, but they don't force them to do anything. But see, truth is never afraid of a lie, but the lie is always deathly afraid of the truth. And so if the pro-abortion industry was so convinced that they're on the right side of history, to use an overused axiom, and that the pregnancy centers are the peddlers of misinformation and hate women, then shouldn't that be apparent to anyone who walks through their doors? But of course it isn't, because they know the self-evident nature of the pro-life position. The pro-life position really is self-evident if you spend any meaningful time thinking about it. And this is why the abortion industry has opposed literally every informed consent pro-life legislative bill at the state level, whether it's informing women about the risk of breast cancer, mental health, preterm labor and subsequent pregnancies, whether it's informing them about the development of their child and showing them how developed the child is, or explaining what is involved in an abortion so that they're very aware of what that procedure will do. They oppose all of these. So the pro-choice movement is in every way not pro-choice. Because if you're going to be pro-choice, what does that require? That someone has all of the information they need to make an informed choice. And the pro-abortion movement has gone out of their way and bent over backwards and twisted themselves into political pretzels to ensure that women do not receive all of the information they need to exercise their choice. Pregnancy centers do give women all of the information they need. They are, in a very real way, the pro-choice position, but there is no choice to kill an innocent human being. And the fact that pregnancy centers offer literally every service that abortion centers do, minus the baby butchery part, proves that not only do we not need Planned Parenthood, but they need to be entirely defunded and shut down. Not to mention the other federally qualified women's health centers in America that aren't pregnancy centers, that also provide virtually all of the health care and services that Planned Parenthood does, minus the abortions. Women do not need Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is a genocidal, baby murdering, lying organization, and today is the largest, best funded, and most profitable nonprofit in world history, that built themselves off of myths and lies about the unborn child, about feminism, about women's equality, and about the women that they say that they exist to serve, but have literally endangered public health in a way that we can't really even overstate. We don't have time to get into that conversation. But so pregnancy centers are so significant. Why? Because the other side hates them. That's all you need to know as a pro-lifer. If they hate them that much, you should be writing massive checks to those pregnancy centers. And secondly, because we see the wonderful work they do for families, preaching the gospel, but saving these babies whose life is hanging in the balance. And very few churches or Christians will stand in the gap for that child, but pregnancy centers will, and they deserve your support.
Seth, thank you so much. I found that incredibly informative and illuminating, and I'm sure that folks who join us at the Landmark Center in St. Paul for the Elevate Life Gala event on November 17th will get more of the same, probably way better with some fireworks, because it'll be a live in-person event. Really excited about that. Excited that tickets are still available at elevatelifeusa.org/gala. And Seth, if you haven't been to the venue before, it's beautiful. It's like a fairy tale castle. So really excited for that event. And so we'll call it a day. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to or watching this episode of the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you're up to date on life, family, and religious freedom. You can follow us on Instagram at MN Family Council and subscribe to us on YouTube to watch our content. Get the facts, stand for truth.